Good morning.
Good morning, thank you. Thank you. What great timing for this debate. Just a few days after the UKIP plant, Jean-Claude Juncker, gives us a bill for 1.7 billion.
But they knew about it earlier.
It's only in the, it could only be, couldn't it, in the modern day European Union, that financial readjustments mean that a country that has got nearly 60% youth unemployment is going to have to put a bit more money in to give to the Germans. I mean, what an incredible system we've set up. How are things going to improve? They're not. The model is wrong. Helena touched on it. The model actually is wrong. And I think it's wrong in two principal ways. Firstly, the idea that you can take all these disparate countries and put them together inside an economic and monetary union is madness. And I remember very well, and I mean, Gerald made the point when we were having our debate about this, we said, well, surely you have to have political union for this to work. What they thought in Brussels was, no, don't talk about that. Just talk about the wonderful economic benefits, and then as night follows day, political union will follow. That was what they believed inside the European Commission, because remember, the aim of this project is to create a United States of Europe. It is about the abolition of nation states and their replacement with a flag, an anthem, and a variety of presidents, most of whom we've never heard of. But that's what the project's actually about. And there were economists screaming, saying, look, you can make the argument, actually, that Germany and the Benelux countries and some bits of Scandinavia do constitute an optimal currency zone. And in pure economic terms, that can work. But the Club Med countries, are never going to fit inside of this. And the result has been a tragedy. An absolute tragedy. These countries stuck inside a currency they should never have joined in the first place. So how are things going to get better in Greece and in Cyprus and in Italy and probably in the end in France too? Simple, by the single currency blowing apart and not existing anymore. The second problem we've got, we can talk about becoming more competitive until we're blue in the face. We can talk about trying to compete with the Far East. None of it is worth a row of beans. And why? Because the political system that was set up very cleverly in the 1950s was set up to be beyond our democratic fingertips. We cannot change existing employment legislation in the member state countries. We cannot change health and safety at work rules. And we cannot change environmental rules because once something becomes a European law, it becomes part of the acquis communautaire, the body of law that is held by the European Commission. And there's nothing David Cameron, there's nothing the British electorate, there's nothing the French electorate, if they actually wanted reform, which I actually don't think they do. There's nothing any of us can do to change it. And so we found ourselves with this social market model, which may have been very good for our consciences in the 1960s and 70s, but actually leaves us increasingly uncompetitive against the rest of the world. And I would particularly point out what no one's mentioned. We've all talked about the summit last week and the 1.7 billion bill and Cameron banging his fist on the table. What everyone's forgotten is what was also agreed that day is that we would up the level that we're going to cut carbon dioxide emissions to 40%. So just at the very same time that the Americans have gone for shale gas, the Indians and Chinese are mining coal on a scale that we can scarcely imagine, we've decided that more wind energy and higher bills for our manufacturers is the answer. So my conclusion is that there is not going to be any resolution to the Eurozone. It will be a slow, long, lingering death. The Europe that I grew up in was split from east to west by the Berlin Wall, and it's now split from north to south by the Eurozone. The question is France a northern European country or a southern European country? And I think rapidly France is sinking further south.
I want to come back to you. Last night at the dinner, Eric Cantor and Mike Milken, they were speaking, and they asked in the audience how many of you are not from the UK. And I think it would just be helpful to see how many here are not from the UK this morning. So about half, more or less, right? More or less. So just bearing that in mind. With regards to some of the points that you just made, some people might argue that, well, Europe was also formed to maintain peace, for democracy. The single market has helped millions of people get jobs. We see a lot of beneficial trade routes having been set up, or trade what do you call it? People, countries trading with each other. I mean, Germany alone, when you look at some of the trade relations out there, you have something like 1,500 companies in Germany that are British, something like between 200 and 250,000 people employed via those companies, sizable FDI that goes back and forth. I mean, haven't some parts of Europe worked, and isn't it just like a matter of we're making sausages now, and when you make sausages, you just have to keep going.
We're living in a global economy. All through GATT and the World Trade Organization, we've been through 4 decades of global trade liberalization. This has been happening all over the world, not just within the confines of the geography of the European continent. And actually, I mean, this is the only part of the world in which we say to each other, we have to be in a political union in order to buy and sell widgets from each other. Nowhere else in the world pretends that. So no, I think it's wholly unnecessary. And I think the single market, this much championed single market, which still even the Conservatives seem to believe in, well, this week it'll probably change, next week, but even the single market actually is the very thing that has given us this very over-regulated model. And if I could be selfish for a minute and just talk about the United Kingdom as opposed to the rest of Europe, being members of a customs union single market means that we, as the world's 6th or 7th largest trading nation, we're actually forbidden from making our own trade relationships with any other part of the world. In fact, we had a World Trade Organization meeting a couple of years ago where the British delegation was asked to leave the room. I mean, Nicaragua was still in there, but we were asked to leave the room. So the point is actually, far from this being something that is good for our overseas business, it's actually very inhibiting and very cloying on our ability to be a global trading nation. And Switzerland, just last quick point, little Switzerland, who negotiates her own trade deals, she's got more free trade agreements globally than we've got as members of the European Union.
They need us as much, if not more, than we need them, and therefore they are vulnerable and they will have to renegotiate if that's the route that we want to take.
But Howard, that's economically, I'm completely with you. We are now the Eurozone's biggest export market in the world.
Yes.
The deficit, as you say, is about 45 billion a year. 200 billion over the last 5 years, and no sign of that changing. So I agree with you. I mean, Lord Digby Jones said, actually, you could get a free trade deal with the EU within 24 hours because the German car industry would demand that was the case. And I agree with that. But the renegotiation point, I disagree with you strongly. There are really, I mean, what this is coming to, and this is not where Cameron wanted to be, but it's where he's been pushed to. And it seems with each by-election that takes place, his line has to...
I wondered how long it was going to take to come on to that.
Well, I mean, before Claxon, he'd never even talked about renegotiating the free movement of peoples. That had never even been on the... In fact, for his whole political career, he'd been a champion of the free movement of peoples. But the point is this, there are 2 things the Brits would need in a renegotiation. Being told we can catch herrings in Massoland or something like that just isn't going to cuss it.
I'm sorry.
And it really isn't. Well, a minor cosmetic... Oh, you do. But a minor cosmetic concession isn't going to cut it. To win a referendum...
Some of us like herring, by the way.
I do. I love them. I mean, don't misunderstand me. But we're going to need a different deal on the free movement of peoples, particularly with the ex-communist countries, and we're going to need a deal on the supremacy of law. And the point is this, Mrs. Thatcher at Fontainebleau, 30 years ago, swinging her handbag, she renegotiated something. What she didn't renegotiate was the treaty itself.
Yeah.
And Cameron's dilemma now is he's pushed to a position where the only renegotiation that can work is a fundamental treaty change. Are the Germans going to want to fundamentally renegotiate the treaty? I would argue no. And I think what we'll see from Germany is a very clear, pragmatic argument that the relationship with the United Kingdom post-treaty must be one simply of trade. Be short of France. No, I'm being serious. The country's in real trouble. And it gives me no pleasure to say that. I love France. But it's, I remember in sort of early mid-70s when I was young, the sort of general feeling of depression in Britain, a feeling that it was all over. We were done for. The sick man of Europe, the 3-day week, the power strikes, the miners bringing down the government. And that's exactly how France feels. I've been all over France in the last couple of years, and the place feels very unhappy, very miserable. The political system is basically broken. The centre-right party is in tatters. Hollande is doing the same to the Socialist Party. The Front National, despite some really genuinely unpleasant elements, is very much on the rise. And I think that as a French presidential election approaches, if things continue on this course, we may well see at least the prospect of a speculation of Marine Le Pen running on a ticket that is not Front National, but is running on a ticket that is Marine Le Pen. She could become the next French president. And if she does, you know, you can forget about the debate on race. Let's talk economics. She seems to be even more protectionist and even more socialist and even more statist than anything France has yet produced. So be sure to France.
Resignation, because the guy has gotten pretty much all his statistics wrong, all his forecasts wrong, and the Bundesbank does exactly what they please, make life very, very difficult.
I'll book you as a guest if you want to come on. Right. You can call for it.
The problem is if I call for resignation, nobody cares. But if somebody from prominence has to start calling accountability, and I want to get your perspective on how we politicians, business community, can actually help Mario Draghi at least stop the sick child from dying.
If we were to get rid of people and sack people because their financial forecasts were wrong, there'd be nobody left anywhere, would there? Including this government. So, it doesn't really work like that. Draghi, I suppose, could be credited, you know, with having made the comment a couple of years ago that we will do whatever it takes, that probably for then did stem the flow of what looked like another desperate downward move, and with the possibility of more bailouts or bail-ins. So I think Draghi does have, if I'm being, forget my opinion, but within the European Parliament, within the European Commission, within Brussels itself, Draghi at the moment is one of the few respected figures.
And do you think he has full authority right now? You don't think it's getting compromised by this relentless German pressure?
Well, I think the architecture of Europe is very complicated, isn't it? This system of the Commission, and I talked earlier about the acquis communautaire and the way that the Commission has the sole right to propose legislation, and once it's passed, it owns it. The European Parliament, which is like effectively like the House of Lords. We can delay things, we can amend things, but we can't initiate law. The Council of Ministers, and then ultimately, of course, the Court. So it is a very complicated system of lawmaking, and the ECB sort of fits in there somewhere. But the reality is, when the crisis hit in 2008, the people that were in charge, the two top dogs, were Mr. Barroso, the former Maoist, and well, I think it is relevant. Actually, 6 of the new European Commission that were voted in last week were former members of the Communist Party. I think this is relevant in terms of their thinking about central control of the European economy. And the other guy, of course, that was in charge was my very good friend from Belgium, the first ever permanent president of the European Council, Herman Van Rompuy. And they were the top dogs. These two people that were... In fact, Van Rompuy's poll rating in terms of recognition in Britain, before I called him a damp rag, was 1.5%. And that was optimistic on a good day and rounded up, in my view. And after I'd finished, 3% knew who he was. So he should have been paying me for doing it, really. But the point is, these were the guys in charge. These were the guys in charge facing the crisis, facing the bailouts, and, whatever their lack of personal leadership skills, the fact they'd never been elected actually meant they had no credibility. And so what has happened is, since 2008, the Germans run Europe now. And what the Germans say, go. And getting back to your question, and the question that we've all debated, in terms of what should the ECB, what powers should Draghi be allowed to have, it's Chancellor Merkel that will decide that and nobody else.
Okay.
Says that the strength of populist parties, which I assume means Mr. Farage's party...
Yeah. I think she meant popular, actually. But anyway,
I'm not sure what a populist party is.
They have to be rude about us all the time.
Are they going to abort the efforts for structural reform?
You're asking me?
Yeah, I'm asking. You're the only European there. And the panel,
Well,
we know what they
I definitely have my own opinions, definitely, but in my role, I prefer to stay completely neutral to that. Yeah. I was actually going to just go question by question and get some answers to precisely some of the blurbs in here, because I think the blurbs are actually very good. And then we took another tangent. But I think we should come back and ask some of these questions, though, in terms of whether or not the strength of the populist parties across the continent are going to abort the efforts of structural reform. Do you consider yourself populist? Do you say,
this is Barroso started this, because I had this remarkable situation for the last 10 years where I sit in seat number 20 on the front row of the European Parliament in Strasbourg, and dear old Barroso was in seat number 21, about sort of 6 feet from me. So I got to know the chap quite well, and I must have got under his skin because he started to attack populist parties. And what really got them was after the French and Dutch rejected the European Constitution and they rebranded it the Lisbon Treaty and thought, cool, blimey, Governor, that's fine, it'll go through now. The Irish had a referendum and said no, and that was when it started. We will not bow to populism, is what Barroso said and Schulz said, and they all said. And parties like mine were branded populist. What it means is they will not bow to democracy. They will do whatever they can to ignore the peoples across this continent. And in the end, this is going to break. It cannot work. You cannot go on ignoring people and putting them inside a totally artificial national construct.
Bigger issues, but at the moment I see Brussels as in denial still.
And Euroscepticism is growing everywhere, and it's growing on the right, the centre, and the left, and even in Germany. I mean, it's very interesting. You talked about Germany, and Ireland. You know, the German guilt was such that the European project and their positive role in it was a way of them showing the world that actually they're rather good people. But even in Germany, you know, Alternative for Deutschland, who are the least populist party I've ever seen in my life, because they're very intellectual in terms of their approach to the electorate, and they're now in double-digit scores. They're winning seats in regional elections. They've won seats in the European Parliament. So actually, this Eurosceptic trend is happening everywhere.
Nigel.
I'm going to say this to you. The European project is a post-war project designed to bring warring states together around the table, and in that it was a laudable and sensible thing to do. But before anyone knew what was happening, they'd foisted upon us a treaty. And that treaty's been updated and amended several times. And we can sit on this panel and talk to a blue in the face about reform and change and new leaders in Europe. None of it will make any difference unless there is fundamental treaty change. And I do not see that treaty change. Even the prospect of Britain leaving will not mean the French and Germans will want treaty change. So I think the whole thing politically is, frankly, it's done for. And the sooner it breaks up, the better. And then perhaps we can have a Europe, you know, a more sensible Europe, a Europe that has a free trade area, a Europe that has cooperation, a Europe that has reciprocity, but not political union.
And that was God interjecting.
What I wondered about that.
A bit of clap of thunder.
You didn't, frankly, have the balls to put country before party.